Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. It was a big day for India today where we won a major diplomatic battle at the International Court of Justice. Justice Dalveer Bhandari has been elected as the final judge of the International Court of Justice. And to talk about that, I have with me in our studio today Shashank, former Foreign Secretary, KP Nayar, Strategic Analyst, Surat, Singh, Senior Advocate to the Supreme Court, and Pant, Distinguished Fellow, ORF. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Nayar, I'd like to begin with you first. Of course, major diplomatic victory for India. I mean, how do you look at it?
Well, it's part of a long train of victories, you know. See, in 1996, we suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of Japan in the election to the Security Council. India got only 40 votes out of 181 at that time, I think. Then the tide turned in 2010 when we got elected to the Security Council after 19 years with 187 out of 192 votes. And since then, there's not been looking back, you know. We haven't lost a single election as far as I recall since then. So this is part of a long string of victories, and it really shows that India has, in terms of international organizations, after hiatus, gone back to the era of Jawaharlal Nehru, non-aligned movement, decolonization, that kind of popularity in the United Nations.
Sure. You know, Ambassador, what does it mean for India, the re-election of Justice Dalveer Bhandari? How do we look at it?
You know, India is one of the countries which is emerging very rapidly on the economic firmament. At the same time, India has always abided by the decisions taken by the International Court of Justice, or it has gone only where it felt that yes, it can go to the Court of Justice and abide by those decisions. And I think the recent case of the maritime boundary with Bangladesh was one of them where they implemented it. Secondly, India has been actively participating, especially in the peacekeeping operations of the UN, and so they have a very high reputation with regard to international cooperation and partnership. Lately, I would say that many countries have even bilaterally given support to India for becoming permanent members of the Security Council or setting up strategic partnerships with India. Now, suddenly this issue comes up, whether to get re-elected to the International Court of Justice or not against the candidature of a permanent member of the Security Council, that's the UK, which has always been there in the ICJ. And that, I think, was a very tough thing to do. And 11 ballots took place. So for India to emerge from that, I think it's something remarkable in many ways, I would say.
You know, as a former Foreign Secretary, what do you think would have gone on, you know, in the background? What would have happened really, you know, to try and get this victory? You called it remarkable yourself. So what do you think was happening behind the scenes?
No, I'm understating it quite a bit. I'm quite sure that my younger colleagues must be really whatever, drinking water or whatever it is, but they must be really celebrating it very well, because this was very hard work on their part. And I remember that in the media they are saying that really the British had already agreed to withdraw, when suddenly some of them said, why not try a new method which has never been tried in the past in the UN, that is select 3 people from the Security Council, 3 members from the General Assembly, and put them together. So I think those countries which had been voting for UK perhaps realized that the game is up, and now they would be shown for what they are doing to vote against India, but at the same time telling India that they are the closest strategic partner of India. So I think therefore finally they said, okay, please call back your guy. And so it was very generous of the British and the British judge that he withdrew, and they said, look, they feel that a close friend like India has got into the International Court of Justice, and they will give full support.
Sure. Professor Pant, you know, what are the circumstances under which the UK has, you know, had to withdraw its candidate? You know, what do you think has gone on there?
I think Britain is facing a really difficult time post Brexit, and this is I think one of the larger significance of this election is that it tells you something which is what is happening underlying the forces of international politics are shifting. And I think this shift away from a very prominent member of the UN Security Council to an emerging power also tells you that the power distribution is shifting and non-Western members are willing to challenge some of the traditional foundations of global governance. So I think in that respect, what we are witnessing now is this shift towards a power shift, but also in terms of Britain. Post Brexit, there is a sense that British foreign policies need to change. But how do they need to change, and where, for example? I think this is a question that many Britons would be asking today. And that look, it signals a great diminishing of British status in the world, that we are finding it difficult to support, to garner support. And as I think Foreign Secretary mentioned earlier, this idea that you have important members of the European club, and including America, would have told Britain that, look, it's a major problem, you would lose face if you go ahead with the kind of joint mechanism that was being suggested. And I think the best solution at that point was to withdraw. But I think this is there's a larger malaise in the British polity, and that is also reflected in the way perhaps that this candidacy and this nomination was activated, operationalized, and in the end they took the decision that they had to. But I think it signals something very fundamental, both about global politics as well as Britain's position in global politics today.
Mr. Nayar, taking this point about the fallout of Brexit further, ICJ was not the only thing that the United Kingdom lost out on. They also, Amsterdam won the battle to host the European Medicines Agency, and Paris won its bid to host the European Banking Authority. Is there more to come for the United Kingdom?
You see, in this particular case, I suspect that the United Kingdom was going by past experience in UN elections, in the General Assembly. Many times this sort of contests have taken place. The last one I remember, which I also covered very passionately, was the contest for the Security Council seat. I think it was in 2009. Between Venezuela, Chavez's Venezuela, and Guatemala, and the voting went on into 12 rounds, and the last round was at midnight, and General Assembly members sat through. But eventual outcome was that as a compromise, both of them dropped out, and a third country was brought in for the Latin American seat. Britain probably calculated that they would be able to keep up the pressure through various rounds of voting. But what they didn't anticipate was that their numbers would come down, In the end, it was quite hopeless, 110 to 64 or something like that, 67, I think, right?
121 to about 67, I think.
There were several rounds, so
yes.
The figures kept changing. So the British figure kept depleting, which is actually the most significant aspect, that in the old days people would switch towards the big powers, because they can offer incentives, they can offer quid pro quo. But in this case, British figure kept going down. They didn't anticipate it, and that was the miscalculation which finally forced them out of the election, forced them to pull out.
Ambassador, are we witnessing winds of change, perhaps a change in the old order maybe?
I would say yes. One is that I remember Mr. Nayar mentioned about the India-Japan rivalry at the time of Security Council seat a few years ago. And then afterwards, the Japanese told us that, look, why did you go in for it? Because when we told you that we are going to fight for it, which means that we have many instruments to use, which you don't have. British might have also used those instruments which Mr. Nayar alluded to. But the point is that new equations are emerging. And above everything else, apart from whatever we have sided with Russia and China to set up Russia, India, China partnership, BRICS, etc., etc. But this new Quad, which has re-emerged recently, has also pointed finger towards a new kind of equation which is developing in Asia. And that Asia can not be dominated by only one country, that is China, but others will come up and say, okay, let us have a peaceful Asia where everybody can have a voice as per the international rules and regulations. So I think it is really a justification for whatever we are trying to do. And other countries have been speaking about it. So the developing countries feel that yes, they must go with the solidarity of the rising powers, the developing countries, which has happened here, and even the developed countries, which are now trying to find support for an idea of a peaceful Asia, balanced Asia, abiding by the international rules and regulations, more transparency, etc. So they are also moving in that direction. So I think this is really, as you say, that this is a new change. The beginning years, we'll let us see where does it go. I mean, there is a time, we have put 2050, where China say that they will become #1 in the world. India also is likely to be somewhere there. So let us keep that in mind, that it's a slow progress, but it is started.
Okay, the progress has started, and it's a good thing at the end of the day. You know, Professor Pant, the Security Council seat has been raised thrice already in our debate in the last 10 minutes. Is this what happened yesterday at the International Court of Justice a shot in the arm for India's Security Council seat bid?
I think it shows that that New Delhi is garnering greater support in the international community, that there are many more countries who are willing to listen to what India has to say and what India has to offer. And I think that is a positive change. I wouldn't really go that far in terms of saying that, look, perhaps Security Council seat is the next venue for contestation. I think there we know the real problem. We know the issues are. We have gone over them again and again. And I think there the power structure is such that it would be a while before we can really put our foot into the door. And as I think Shashank mentioned here about the possibility of what sort of equations are emerging. And the sort of equations that were mentioned, Quad, China's rise, etc., they perhaps even make it more complicated for India to enter the Security Council in a certain context. But I think the underlying message of this contest is that India's voice has become powerful. And I think also very interestingly, I think the way Indian diplomacy is now being conducted, it's free of those ideological constraints. It's free of this diffidence that often we used to witness in the past. I think now India is more self-assured, more confident of its role in global politics. I mean, you saw Indian politicians from the Prime Minister onwards leading from the front. I mean, there was a message going out that this is serious. We want it, we desire it, and therefore we will go all out for it. And I think that's a message that is very important in diplomacy for India to be sending out. In the old days, Britain would have done very similar things. Today, it's India that is more aggressive in terms of pursuing its interests, what it feels are its interests, and its right to be at the top table in the world. So I think that is a change, which is again very interesting from Indian diplomacy's perspective.
Things have turned topsy-turvy over the last few years. Okay, all right, taking the discussion forward, joining me on the program now is Surat Singh, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court. Dr. Singh, first and foremost, let's understand what is the role of the ICJ and what is its jurisdiction really, and why is it so important today?
Well, first of all, in this world of globalization, there are a lot of issues which are inter-borders, and International Court of Justice plays a very significant role. It's not like a domestic court that every decision will be binding. It's by protocol of option, as we call it. But if the two countries sign that they give the jurisdiction to the court, then the decision of International Court of Justice would be binding. For example, in Jadhav case, we are seeing that both India and Pakistan have signed the protocol. So now when there was a dispute that it was a case of spying or it was really a false case on an Indian, so that went up to ICJ, and ICJ granted significant interim stay, which is binding on Pakistan. And so much so now Pakistan is understanding this, and they allowed even his wife to see him. So it has a great both legal but more moral role also. And India being now Asia, as we say, 21st century, the century of Asia, there is no doubt about that. Asia, China and India, and that should be reflected in the international order, because the earlier order was built in 1950 after Second World War, Europe was a significant power. That's why they had as many as Britain was there, then France was there, Russia was there. So three in one continent. Whereas Asia is far bigger continent and now its importance is far more important. So it is not fairly, adequately represented. So now there's really a change in the world order in that sense. The world order is adjusting to the ground realities of the world.
Okay, there's a change in the world order is what the Supreme Court advocate is suggesting. You know, Mr. Nayar, as the days go by, do you believe that the Security Council is slowly losing its sheen, slowly losing its power maybe?
I don't think so, because at the end of the day, if you recall the Libya invasion, although by sleight of hand, by using one word, was as a result of Security Council authorization. And the fact that there was no invasion of Syria was also because of the Security Council, because Russia and China in particular realized that they had been taken for a ride by the Americans in the Security Council over Libya. But what I want to add is that this, while we are all happy about Justice Bandari's victory, it shouldn't lead to complacency, because we must realize that while a victory is a victory, the numbers have come down, 187 2010 for the Security Council to 121. So what we need is to marshal our resources, and in the United Nations everything is trade-off, you see, and we fortunately we have somebody now in our government who is actually the architect of the 2010 victory. He is a minister now, Singh Puri.
Yes.
And the victories that we achieved in the UN since the 2010 Security Council election were all masterminded by Singh Puri. The most memorable victory that I recall is when Gopinathan, who was our permanent representative in Geneva at that time, defeated the Chinese ambassador here in the election to the supervisory body on the UN. And nobody expected, it was a big surprise. Everybody thought that China would win. And Gopinathan won handsomely, you see. So what we need is that we should use our resources, and people like Singh Puri, who used our networking capabilities and knowledge of the UN system, they should be brought more into the effort to proceed with the Security Council thing.
Sure, sure. You know, talking about trade-offs, Ambassador, do you believe that after this hotly contested race between India and Great Britain, how do you think it's going to affect our bilateral relationship going forward?
Well, if you recall that Harsh had spoken about the post-Brexit developments in Europe, so they are still going on, both in Europe as well as in Britain itself. And they have not adjusted themselves to the new role that they would have to play. But one thing they have done is that they have tried to develop very strong partnership with China on one hand and India on the other hand. India was one of the first countries that the British Prime Minister visited soon after the Brexit decision. Therefore, I do not see any difficulty as regards the question of bilateral relations between UK and India are concerned. In fact, I feel that Britain would be obliged, as they are cut off more and more from the European institutions, that they would have to then find international partners. So whether it is USA on one hand or in Asia, China and India, I think they would try to work with them. For USA, of course, they will have to then somehow prove their worth by criticizing, as they have been doing, Russia. And that I do not know how will play out in European context or the global context with regard to, let's say, contests in Syria, etc. But I think as far as Asia is concerned or India is concerned, we should have no problem in improving our relations on the economic side.
Sure. You know, Professor Pant, talking about the post-Brexit era, you know, do you believe that the United Kingdom needs to try and find new friends, try and find new allies going forward. And let's not forget the CHOGM is to be held in the United Kingdom in April 2018 as well. So that also probably would have been playing on their minds, because I understand that Theresa May wants Prime Minister Modi to be an integral part of that event as well.
Yeah, I think this is a necessity for them now in terms of reaching out to the larger world beyond European Union, because I think European Union is turning out to be a tough negotiator, and they have made some very strict demands on Britain, and Britain will have to comply with them. So I think Britain, as of necessity, needs to move out into spheres where it has not gone before. So you see this idea of a global Britain now being propounded, an idea that Britain can be even more global than it had been in the past, because it is now cut off from European Union. It needs to look out to the new markets, the new countries like India and China, and I think they have invested a lot in their relationships with India. If you just see the trajectory of Indo-UK relations in the last decade, successive prime ministers, right from Tony Blair to David Cameron in particular, and now Theresa May, have invested significantly. So I think that the question for them is, what is their role? How do they envision their role in global politics? And I think that's a question that's not yet answered. But as you rightly point out, they are now renegotiating the terms of their engagement with the world. Commonwealth is one area where I think they are now increasingly willing to make India central to this notion of Commonwealth, so that it has greater credibility. And I think that is something that we will see them doing as we move forward. I think by and large, Indo-UK relations will be on sound footing. But what I think it tells you is that now you will see India is much more of an attractive partner post-Brexit than it has been before. And that engagement perhaps is one way in which both countries, both India and UK, can benefit if you engage more productively and more deeply perhaps than we have done so far.
All right, time now to get closing comments from all my guests, and let me come back to the topic of the International Court of Justice. You know, Dr. Singh, what is the symbolism really of Justice Bhandari's victory at the ICJ?
Well, first of all, as I said before, these things have a much more symbolic role rather than real role, because International Court of Justice operate on the basis of jurisdiction based on consent of the parties. So if the parties do not give the consent, court does not have the jurisdiction. However, in this climate of globalization, International Court of Justice exercises a lot of moral authorities. Its decision, even if they are ignored, still world opinion always goes in favor of those. So now it shows that India is playing a greater role at international level. Then at personal level, I have the privilege of knowing Justice Bhandari since 1993, almost 4 years. He was an excellent judge at High Court. He was an outstanding judge at Supreme Court. As a human being, he is brilliant, bold, and most importantly, benevolent. His sympathies are always with the downtrodden, always with the common man, always with those who are suffering. So that kind of a balance was needed at International Court of Justice. So we are extremely happy that one of our ablest judges is serving 2 terms. Before that, we have President Nagendra Singh, who was president of ICJ. Justice Pathak was also there. So we have a tradition where our outstanding judges and civil servants have been serving on International Court of Justice. And now, as India is emerging as a great power, having one of our judges as a permanent member of International Court of Justice for another term shows that India is shining.
All right, India is shining is what you're suggesting at this point in time, and let's hope that it shines even brighter in the days to come. I've got time for only one quick closing comment on the program. You know, Mr. Nayar, how do we use this to our advantage and take it forward?
Well, some course correction is needed. And this election should serve as a shot in the arm for that. Because before that also, recently we had another victory, Neeru Chadda, who used to be in the permanent mission. She won a judicial election. When I say course correction, what I mean is that, see, in 2004, G4 was in a group of 4 was in a strong wicket. And we developed cold feet and did not move a resolution in the General Assembly, which would have been the next stage for the Security Council. We should have done that because we were not confident. And then there was a decision taken that India would recontest after our term expired in 2012 in the Security Council, recontest in 2014. That also the government, the previous government developed cold feet and then we withdrew. We should have confidence in ourselves, you know.
And take bolder steps is what
Yes,
you're suggesting.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
on that note then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.